The winter of 1944 wasn't just cold. It was the coldest winter Europe had seen in nearly 50 years. And for more than 70,000 American soldiers, the greatest threat wasn't a German rifle, or an artillery shell, or even a tank. It was the cold itself. By the time the fighting ended, entire divisions had been crippled. Thousands of soldiers had become casualties without ever being hit by enemy fire. Military investigators would later conclude that much of the suffering had been preventable. That is the part that still haunts historians today. This isn't simply a story about one of World War II's bloodiest campaigns. It's the story of ordinary young men who were sent into one of the harshest winters in modern history, wearing equipment that wasn't designed to keep them alive, and the incredible, often desperate tricks they discovered to survive when the Army's official solutions failed. So tonight, you're going to experience that winter through the eyes of one of those soldiers. Not the generals, not the politicians, just one frightened 19-year-old trying to survive another night. December 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. You wake with a violent jolt as the truck slams into another frozen rut. Your entire body aches. You've been sitting on the same hard wooden bench for so long that your back feels permanently bent. Around you, dozens of other soldiers sway with every bump in the road, packed shoulder to shoulder inside the canvas-covered transport. Every breath hangs in the air as a cloud of white vapor before disappearing into the darkness. Nobody talks much anymore. Hours ago, there were jokes. Someone from New York argued baseball with a kid from Alabama. Another soldier claimed he could smell Germany already. Now, the truck is silent except for the grinding engine and the occasional cough. You've been driving for what feels like forever, 12 hours, maybe longer. You stopped keeping track somewhere after crossing into Belgium. Your name is Jimmy Callahan. You're 19 years old. Only 6 weeks ago, your biggest concern was whether your father's dairy cows would survive another Pennsylvania winter. You'd wake before sunrise, milk the herd, help your mother stack firewood, complain about frozen fingers while standing only a few yards from a warm kitchen. Back then, you thought you knew what cold felt like. You had no idea. When you left home, your mother cried without trying to hide it. Your father simply reached out and shook your hand. He didn't hug you. He didn't tell you to stay safe. He just looked you in the eyes and squeezed your hand a little harder than usual. That was his way of saying everything he couldn't put into words. Your little sister slipped a folded envelope into your pocket just before the train left. Don't open it until Christmas. You've kept that promise. The letter is still there, folded neatly inside your jacket. Waiting. Outside the truck, snow blankets everything. Not patches of snow. Not the kind that melts by noon. Everything. The trees. The fields. The roads. Even the broken stone walls that divide the countryside have disappeared beneath thick, white drifts. The landscape doesn't look alive anymore. It looks abandoned, like the world itself has frozen solid. You pull your field jacket tighter around your chest. It doesn't help. The Army issued you the standard M1941 field jacket before leaving England. They told everyone it would be enough. It wasn't. Army testing had already shown it offered poor protection in severe winter conditions. A newer design, the M1943 jacket, had already been developed with better insulation and layering in mind. But most of those improved jackets were still sitting in warehouses far behind the front lines, while thousands of soldiers marched into one of Europe's worst winters wearing clothing designed for autumn. Beside you, another soldier is asleep. His head keeps falling against your shoulder every time the truck bounces. You don't push him away. His body heat is the warmest thing you've felt all day. His name is Eddie Martinez. He's from San Antonio, Texas. Yesterday, he admitted something that made everyone laugh. I'd never seen snow before basic training. Back home, winter meant putting on a sweater. Now he's sleeping in temperatures that would freeze water inside a canteen. You glance down. Your own canteen hangs from your belt. You shake it once. Nothing moves. The water froze hours ago. Your lips are cracked. Your throat feels like sandpaper. Even swallowing hurts. The truck suddenly slows. Then, it stops. Nobody says anything. Everyone waits. The engine continues idling. Somewhere ahead, men are shouting. At first you assume they're officers directing traffic. But something sounds wrong. The voices aren't calm. They're panicked. You hear boots crunching through snow. Dozens of them. Martinez finally wakes. "We there?" Before you can answer, someone pulls back the rear canvas flap. Gray daylight floods the truck. And that's when you see them. American soldiers. Running toward you. Not marching. Running. Some still carry rifles. Others have abandoned everything. Helmets. Backpacks. Ammunition. Blankets. One man stumbles past barefoot, clutching only his rifle. Another has no helmet. No gloves. No expression. Their faces are covered with frost. Their uniforms are torn. Several are crying openly. Nobody is giving orders. Nobody is trying to organize them. They're simply trying to get away. One officer passes within a few feet of your truck. His face is so coated with ice that it's difficult to recognize his rank. His hands are empty. His eyes look vacant, like something inside him has already died. He looks directly at you. "Don't go up there." His voice is barely louder than a whisper. "The Germans." He swallows hard. "They're coming." Then he keeps walking. Another soldier throws his rifle into a snowbank without even looking where it lands. Someone else drops a full ammunition belt. Blankets. Entrenching tools. Entire packs. Within minutes, the roadside looks like a military supply depot scattered across the snow. You've spent weeks in training being told that American soldiers never abandon their equipment. Now you're watching hundreds of them do exactly that. Not because they're cowards. Because they're terrified. Martinez stares through the opening. What the hell happened? Nobody answers. Nobody knows. But one thing becomes painfully obvious. Whatever these men experienced, it broke them. And your convoy is driving straight toward it. In movies, battles begin with explosions. In real life, sometimes they begin with silence. With watching exhausted men flee in the opposite direction. With wondering if you'll soon be one of them. The trucks begin moving again. Forward. Straight into the white wilderness. Martinez suddenly leans over the side of the truck. He grabs a wool blanket lying beside the road. A few seconds later, he snatches another pair of socks abandoned in the snow. "What are you doing?" you ask. He stuffs the socks inside his jacket. Whatever scared those guys enough to throw this away? He looks out into the forest. "We're probably going to need it." You don't argue. A moment later, you reach down and grab a folded wool cap someone left behind. Then another pair of socks. Half a carton of cigarettes. Finally, a crumpled newspaper flutters across the snow. It appears to be German. Probably one of the propaganda leaflets dropped from enemy aircraft. You almost throw it back. Instead, you fold it carefully and tuck it inside your jacket. At the time, it seems completely useless. Within 24 hours, that single piece of paper will help save your life. The convoy finally rolled to a stop just inside the Ardennes forest. The engines fell silent. For the first time all day, you could actually hear the winter. Branches creaked beneath the weight of fresh snow. Wind whispered through endless rows of pine trees. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled like an approaching thunderstorm. Nobody had to tell you what it meant. The front line wasn't far away. Move, move, move. A sergeant you've never seen before waves everyone off the trucks. Within seconds, you're standing knee-deep in snow. The cold hits differently now. Inside the truck, at least there had been body heat. Out here, there was nothing. Just open forest, gray sky, and a wind that seemed determined to cut straight through your bones. The sergeant doesn't waste time. The Germans broke through 3 days ago. His voice carries easily through the frozen air. They're pushing toward Bastogne. 7 roads meet there. If they take that town, they'll tear a hole straight through our lines. Most of the men nod. Some pretend they understand. You don't. Honestly, it doesn't matter. At this exact moment, you're thinking about only one thing. Your feet. You can't feel them anymore. Not numb. Not painful. Just gone. Like someone removed everything below your ankles without telling you. You stomp your boots into the snow. Nothing. You wiggle your toes. Nothing. The cold has stolen them. Martinez appears beside you carrying 2 entrenching shovels. Come on. He tosses one into your hands. We're digging together. The words almost make you laugh. Digging together. As if you're building a fence back home. As if this is normal. You follow him between 2 towering pine trees where the ground rises just enough to give a little protection from direct fire. He plants his shovel into the frozen earth. Here, the first strike barely leaves a scratch. The ground is solid. Frozen almost like concrete. You swing harder. Again. Again. Every inch has to be fought for. Within minutes your shoulders burn. Your back aches. Your hands sting despite the gloves. Then, something even worse happens. You begin to sweat. It feels impossible. The air is well below freezing. Yet warm moisture slowly spreads across your back beneath. Your uniform. Your stomach sinks. You remember exactly what your instructors warned about. Sweat kills. Cold air doesn't have to freeze you directly. If your clothes become damp, the moisture strips away your body heat far faster than dry fabric ever could. A wet soldier in winter doesn't stay warm for long. But stopping isn't an option. Not here. Not now. Martinez digs like a machine. Every few seconds he glances toward the distant tree line. Every few seconds he works faster. My drill sergeant always said something. He pauses to drive the shovel into another layer of frozen soil. The guys who dig the fastest. Another shovel full flies behind him. Live the longest. You don't answer. Because suddenly, you believe him. After nearly an hour, you've managed to carve out something that barely deserves to be called a foxhole. It's uneven. Crooked. Nothing like the textbook diagrams from training. But it's deep enough for both of you to crouch inside. You climb down first. Immediately, the wind disappears. Not completely, but enough. Above ground, it had sliced across your face like a knife. Down here, the earth shields you. For the first time all day, you almost feel comfortable. Martinez slides in beside you. Better. You nod. Yeah. For about 20 minutes. Everything seems manageable. Then, the ground begins stealing your heat. Slowly, silently, the frozen earth beneath you behaves like an enormous block of ice. Every ounce of warmth your body produces immediately drains downward. It doesn't matter that the wind has stopped. The ground has become your new enemy. Within half an hour, your legs feel heavy. Within 45 minutes, your knees ache. Within an hour, your teeth chatter so violently that you accidentally bite your tongue. The metallic taste of blood fills your mouth. You look over at Martinez. He's shaking just as badly. This isn't working. He doesn't argue, because he already knows. You've traded one killer for another. The wind couldn't reach you anymore. But now the frozen earth is slowly sucking the heat straight out of your body. You close your eyes. For just a second, your mind drifts home. Your mother's kitchen. The iron stove glowing orange. Fresh bread cooling on the counter. The smell of coffee. The crackling fire. You would trade almost anything just to stand beside that stove for 5 minutes. Then, you remember something. The newspaper. Still folded inside your jacket. You pull it out. The pages are damp now from sweat. Wrinkled. Mostly useless. Or so you thought. A memory suddenly surfaces. Your grandmother. Every winter. Whenever icy drafts crept through the walls of the farmhouse, she'd stuff old newspapers into every crack she could find. As a child, you'd asked why. She smiled. It isn't the paper keeping us warm. It's the air trapped inside it. At the time, you didn't understand. Now, you begin tearing the newspaper into loose sheets. Not folded flat. Not packed tightly. Crumpled. Loose enough to trap tiny pockets of air. Martinez watches with complete confusion. What are you doing? I'm not sure. You've gone crazy. Maybe. You shove the crumpled paper beneath your jacket. Around your ribs. Across your chest. Into the empty spaces inside your sleeves. Then you pull off one boot. Stuff several loose pieces around your sock, and put the boot back on. Martinez continues staring. You seriously think that's going to work? I honestly don't know. There's a long pause. Finally, he sighs. Do mine. Within a few minutes, both of you are wearing layers of crumpled German propaganda underneath your uniforms. It feels ridiculous. You look like scarecrows. For several minutes. Nothing happens. Then, very slowly, something changes. The violent shaking begins to ease. Not disappear. Just ease. Your chest doesn't feel quite so exposed anymore. The wind isn't reaching your skin. The trapped air inside the paper is holding on to just enough body heat to slow the freezing process. Martinez blinks. Holy! He looks down at his jacket. It's actually working. You nod quietly. Neither of you smiles. You're still freezing. You'll remain freezing for weeks. But there's an enormous difference between being uncomfortable and dying. Later, military studies would confirm exactly why this worked. The insulation wasn't the newspaper itself. It was the countless tiny air pockets trapped inside the crumpled paper. Those pockets slowed the movement of heat away from the body, functioning surprisingly well as emergency insulation when nothing else was available. Soldiers across the Ardennes independently discovered the same trick, stuffing newspapers, magazines, and propaganda leaflets inside their uniforms to survive the brutal winter. Without realizing it, thousands of soldiers had begun teaching themselves battlefield physics. Not from manuals, not from officers, from desperation. Martinez looks at you with genuine admiration. You farm boys know some strange things. You shrug. My grandmother knew. Silence returns. Far away, artillery begins firing again. The booming echoes through the forest. Snow falls from the pine branches overhead. Neither of you knows whether it's American guns or German. At this point, it hardly matters. All that matters is that you're still alive. And for the first time since arriving in Belgium, you believe you might survive the night. Then, somewhere beyond the trees, a machine gun opens fire, and everyone in the forest suddenly remembers. The cold isn't the only thing trying to kill them. You wake before sunrise, not because you slept well, because the cold refuses to let you sleep any longer. It feels like someone spent the entire night slowly draining the warmth from your body. Your fingers barely move. Your jaw is stiff. Every joint aches. Even breathing hurts. For a few seconds, you don't remember where you are. Then you open your eyes. Packed earth. Pine branches. Overhead. Gray light creeping into the foxhole. Belgium. The Ardennes. The Battle of the Bulge. Reality comes crashing back all at once. Martinez is already awake. He's crouched near the lip of the foxhole with his rifle resting across his knees, staring into the trees. Without turning around, he says, "Morning." You try answering. Only a strange croak comes out. Your jaw is so stiff you have to physically work it open. Your lips split as you speak. Fresh blood mixes with the dry taste already coating your mouth. How long? About 4 hours. Only 4. He shrugs. I let you sleep through your watch. You should be angry. Every soldier is supposed to take turns standing guard. But honestly, you're too exhausted to care. You slowly push yourself upright. Your muscles refuse to cooperate. It's like someone secretly replaced every bone in your body with rusted iron overnight. Even turning your neck produces a loud crack. Your jacket crinkles as you move. The newspaper. Still there. Still doing its job. Barely. You're alive. At the moment. That feels like a victory. You rub your hands together. Nothing. Still numb. Still useless. Then you glance toward the floor of the foxhole and immediately realize what happened. The newspaper stopped the wind, but it couldn't stop the ground. All night, your body had been pressed directly against frozen Belgian earth. Every ounce of heat your body created simply disappeared downward. The foxhole protected you from bullets, but it was quietly freezing you to death. Martinez finally says what both of you are thinking. We've got to fix this. You nod. We won't survive another week like this. Around the forest, other soldiers begin climbing out of their own foxholes. Nobody looks rested. Men cough constantly. Some limp. Others stand motionless, rubbing frozen hands together, hoping to bring feeling back into fingers that no longer seem connected to their bodies. Somewhere nearby, someone quietly cries. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a slow, hopeless kind of crying. The kind that comes after you've spent days forgetting what warmth even feels like. Then a familiar voice cuts through the forest. Listen up. The same sergeant from yesterday strides between the trees. He's older than most of the men here. Maybe 40. His face looks like old leather left in the sun too long. Deep lines. Broken veins around his nose. Eyes that have clearly watched too many winters. He stops beside your foxhole. Looks down. Then nods once. Good depth. You almost feel proud. Then he points at the floor. Bad floor. Your pride disappears instantly. You boys know what'll kill you faster than a German sniper? Nobody answers. The ground. He kneels beside the foxhole and scoops up a handful of frozen dirt. This. He squeezes the dirt in his glove. Is stealing your body heat every second you're touching it. He tosses it aside. Heat leaves your body two ways. He points toward the trees. Air. Then he points down. And contact. You boys figured out the air part. He taps your jacket. Saw the newspaper trick. A faint smile crosses his face. My mother used to do the same thing back in Oklahoma. Then his expression hardens. But newspaper won't stop this. He stomps his boot on the frozen ground. The earth doesn't care how many blankets you've got. If you're lying directly on frozen soil. He pauses. You might as well be sleeping on a block of ice. The words hang in the air. No one argues. Because every single soldier standing there knows he's right. The sergeant stands. So here's today's lesson. He scans the group. You build a barrier. Something between you. He points at his chest. And the ground. Something that traps air. Something that stops your heat from bleeding away. Without another word, he starts walking deeper into the woods. Come on. You and Martinez exchange a glance before following. Soon a dozen soldiers trail behind him. Nobody wants another night like the last one. After several minutes, the trees suddenly open into a clearing. A battered Belgian farmhouse stands in the distance. Part of the roof has collapsed. Smoke stains cover one wall. Nearby, an old wooden barn somehow still stands despite obvious shell damage. The sergeant points toward it. See that? Everyone nods. Inside that barn, he smiles for the first time. Is gold. Several soldiers look confused. Not real gold. He laughs quietly. Something better. He walks toward the barn. You follow. The heavy wooden door hangs crooked on broken hinges. Inside, the smell hits immediately. Animals. Dust. Rotting wood. And beneath all of it, dry straw. Huge piles of it. Golden. Dry. Beautiful. The sergeant grabs an armful. Hell with regulations. He throws the straw onto the floor. This. He pats the pile. Will save more lives than another truckload of rifles. Nobody laughs. Because everyone believes him. He kneels beside the straw. You need insulation underneath you. Not inches. He holds up both hands. Feet. 12 inches minimum. More if you've got it. One soldier asks, what if there isn't a barn? The sergeant nods. Good question. He walks back outside toward a nearby pine tree. Snaps off a thick evergreen branch. Holds it up. Pine bows. He shakes the needles. These trap air. He tosses several more onto the ground. You pile enough of these together. He spreads them into a thick layer. And suddenly the frozen earth isn't touching you anymore. He keeps building. One layer. Then another. Crossing them in different directions. Martinez watches closely. Why cross them? The sergeant points down. If you stack everything the same way. He presses his boot into the pile. Your weight crushes it. The insulation disappears. But if you cross the layers, he demonstrates. The air stays trapped. That's what keeps you alive. You stare at the simple pile of branches. It doesn't look impressive. It doesn't look military. It certainly isn't in any training manual. But suddenly, it makes perfect sense. The sergeant continues. No pine trees. Use leaves, dead grass, corn stalks, anything dry. The material doesn't matter. The trapped air does. He pauses. The veterans learned this after Normandy. He looks around the group. Unfortunately, they learned by watching friends freeze to death. Silence. Nobody says a word. Because everyone knows someone who almost didn't wake up this morning. Or someone who never did. The sergeant finally waves everyone toward the barn. Take all you can carry. You'll need every handful. You and Martinez throw armful after armful of straw over your shoulders. The dry stalks scratch your neck. Dust fills your nose. You sneeze repeatedly. You couldn't care less. This isn't straw anymore. It's survival. Halfway back to the foxhole, you finally ask the question that's been bothering you for days. Sergeant. He glances over. They told us to wear extra socks. 2 pairs. Sometimes 3. My feet feel worse. The sergeant sighs. Because whoever told you that didn't understand winter. He kneels beside your boots. Your boots were built for 1 pair. You cram extra socks inside. He squeezes the leather. You cut off circulation. He taps your foot. No blood flow. No warmth. No toes. Several soldiers instinctively looked down at their boots. The British figured this out before we did. They sized winter boots correctly. They trained their men. They understood cold. Then his voice turns bitter. We're the strongest army in the world. And we're losing men. He pauses. To the weather. No one disagrees. Because by now, everyone has seen it with their own eyes. The Germans weren't the only enemy hiding in these woods. Winter was fighting alongside them. And so far, winter was winning. By the time you and Martinez make it back to your foxhole, your shoulders are on fire. Every step through, the snow feels heavier than the last. The bundle of straw digging into your arms would have seemed worthless a week ago. Now, it feels more valuable than ammunition, more valuable than food. Because food keeps you alive tomorrow. This might keep you alive tonight. You dump the first armful into the bottom of the foxhole. The straw barely covers the frozen dirt. Martinez drops another load. Then another. Soon the bottom disappears beneath a thick layer of dry stalks. The sergeant climbs down beside you. Not like that. You stop. He kneels in the straw. Everything has a direction. He spreads 1 layer neatly from left to right. 6 inches. Then he places another layer across it. Front to back. Now you've trapped air. He presses his hand down. The straw compresses. But not completely. Small pockets remain between every stalk. Tiny invisible chambers. Tiny pockets of warmth waiting to happen. You boys remember one thing. He looks at each of you. Warmth doesn't come from the straw. It comes from the air inside it. You nod. The lesson sounds familiar. Your grandmother said almost exactly the same thing about newspaper. Different material. Same principle. You spend the next 20 minutes rebuilding the entire floor. Layer after layer. Crossed carefully. Until the bottom of the foxhole resembles a giant bird's nest. Ridiculous. But thick. Martinez disappears for a few minutes. When he returns, he's dragging several large pine branches behind him. He grins. Figured we'd improve it. He lays the evergreen boughs across the straw. The needles spring upward instead of flattening. Even more trapped air. Even more insulation. You climb inside first. Carefully. Expecting the branches to collapse. Instead, they hold. The floor gives slightly beneath your weight. Almost like an old mattress. For the first time since arriving in Belgium, your back isn't touching frozen earth. You close your eyes. Wait. 10 seconds. 30. A minute. Nothing. No icy sensation. Creeping through your spine. No feeling that your body is slowly leaking warmth into the ground. Just neutral. Martinez lowers himself beside you. His eyes widen immediately. Oh, he laughs. Not a nervous laugh. A genuine one. This actually works. You nod slowly. It really does. The difference isn't dramatic. You're still cold. Your breath still fogs in front of your face. Your fingers still ache. But the cold no longer feels like it's climbing upward through your bones. It's the first real improvement you've experienced since reaching Belgium. Outside, the forest comes alive again. Artillery rumbles somewhere beyond the hills. Machine guns chatter briefly before falling silent. The war hasn't stopped. It simply feels farther away. Inside your little foxhole, for the first time, you almost feel protected. Martinez reaches into his pack, pulls out the wool blanket the two of you scavenged from the roadside days earlier. The blanket still smells faintly of smoke, probably from its previous owner. Whoever abandoned it probably believed it weighed too much to carry. Now, that same blanket becomes priceless. You spread it across both shoulders, sharing every bit of warmth. Nobody complains. Out here, pride freezes faster than fingers. Martinez reaches into another pocket, pulls out the frozen K-rations. He bangs one against the side of the foxhole. It makes a sound like striking a brick. Neither of you laughs. Food has become another battle entirely. You finally manage to break apart several crackers. They're rock hard, almost impossible to chew. Still, you force yourself to eat. Every bite takes effort. Every swallow hurts. But the sergeant's words echo inside your head. Calories are heat. Every movement your body makes, every shiver, every heartbeat, burns fuel. In weather like this, a soldier can burn thousands of calories each day simply trying not to freeze. Without food, the body begins consuming itself. Muscle, fat, anything it can find. You don't eat because you're hungry anymore. You eat because stopping means dying. Martinez notices you staring at the tiny ration. Think it'll be enough? You already know the answer. No. Neither of you says another word. Outside, a group of replacement soldiers passes your position. They're easy to recognize. Their uniforms still look new. Their boots still shine beneath the snow. Their faces still carry hope. You watch them digging their foxholes. Most are making the same mistake you made. Too shallow. Bare ground. No insulation. No roof. You stand immediately. Hey, one of them looks over. You need straw. The young soldier frowns. What? Straw. Pine branches. Anything. Don't sleep on the dirt. The replacements exchange confused looks. One shrugs. Our lieutenant said, just dig 2 feet. You shake your head. Dig deeper. Trust me. Another soldier laughs. Who made you an expert? Before you can answer, the older sergeant appears behind them. He did. Silence. The laughter disappears instantly. The sergeant points toward your foxhole. You boys see that. The replacements nod. That's what keeps a man alive. He turns toward them. Forget what's in the manual. The manual isn't freezing out here. You are. Without another word, the young soldiers begin digging again. This time, deeper. You watch quietly. Something changes inside you. A few days ago, you were the frightened replacement asking questions. Now, you're the one passing knowledge forward. Not because you're older, because surviving teaches lessons faster than any classroom ever could. That evening, the temperature drops even lower. The wind howls through the pines with terrifying force. Snow falls almost sideways. Several foxholes nearby begin collapsing beneath the weight. Men scramble outside to dig themselves free. Your roof of pine branches bends, but holds. The straw beneath you stays dry. The blanket traps what little warmth your bodies produce. Hours pass. Midnight arrives, and something incredible happens. Martinez falls asleep. Not unconscious from exhaustion. Actually asleep. A few minutes later, you realize something else. He's snoring. Softly. Steadily. You stare at him in disbelief. You haven't heard anyone snore since leaving England. Nobody has been warm enough, or relaxed enough, to sleep deeply. Until now. You lean back against the insulated wall. Close your eyes. Above you, the wind continues screaming across Belgium. German artillery continues searching for targets. Somewhere in those endless woods, thousands of men are still shivering inside shallow foxholes. Some of them won't see morning. You don't know their names. You never will. But lying there, surrounded by straw, pine branches, and one old wool blanket, you realize something. Survival isn't always about courage. Sometimes, it's about learning one small thing, one day earlier than everyone else. 3 days pass, or maybe 4. You've stopped trying to keep track. Time doesn't work the same way anymore. There are no weekends, no holidays, no normal rhythm. There is only daylight, darkness, and the cold that never leaves. You begin measuring time differently. One hot meal, another night survived, another pair of dry socks, another soldier who doesn't answer roll call. That's your calendar now. The straw mattress has changed everything. Not enough to make life comfortable. Nothing out here is comfortable, but you're waking up alive. That alone feels like progress. Still, the veterans keep shaking their heads whenever they walk past your position. Too shallow. One of them says it almost every day. You boys need to dig deeper. At first you ignore them. Your foxhole already feels twice as good as it did before. How much difference could another foot possibly make? Then one evening, the wind answers that question for you. It begins just after sunset. A low whistle through the pine trees. Within an hour, it becomes a roar. Snow blows sideways through the forest. Every opening fills with drifting powder. The temperature plummets so quickly it almost feels alive. You and Martinez huddle beneath your blanket. The straw still insulates the floor, but the wind keeps reaching inside the foxhole. Every gust steals another little piece of warmth. Martinez finally breaks the silence. We need a roof. You look up. Above you, only open sky. Snow continues falling directly into the foxhole. A roof. It sounds ridiculous. Until you remember something. The paratroopers. The veterans from the 101st Airborne. You've seen their positions. Most of them barely resemble foxholes anymore. They look like underground rooms. Hidden, covered, almost invisible beneath the snow. Tomorrow, you nod. We dig. The next morning begins before sunrise. The ground is even harder now. Every swing of the shovel sends painful vibrations through your frozen hands. The first foot comes slowly. The second, even slower. But then, something unexpected happens. Around 2.5 feet down, the dirt changes. You notice it immediately. The frozen gray soil disappears. In its place, dark earth, moist, loose, almost soft. Curious, you kneel down, press your bare hand against the wall. Then you freeze. Not because it's cold, because it isn't. You call Martinez over. Feel this. He presses his palm against the soil. His eyebrows shoot upward. What? He checks another spot. Same thing. It's not frozen. You stare at the wall, trying to understand. Then, a memory drifts back from childhood. Your father, standing inside the family root cellar. You'd once asked him why it stayed cool in summer and warmer in winter. He smiled. The earth keeps secrets. At the time, you thought he was joking. Now, standing 3 feet underground in Belgium, you finally understand what he meant. The deeper soil hasn't been exposed to the freezing air. It changes temperature very slowly. Above ground, the weather swings wildly. Freezing nights, slightly warmer afternoons, another freezing night. But down here, the earth barely notices. It stores warmth from months earlier. Not enough to feel warm, just enough not to kill you. Martinez shakes his head. It's like he searches for the words. Like the ground forgot it's winter. You laugh. A real laugh. The first one in days. Maybe. You keep digging. By late afternoon, the foxhole reaches nearly 3 feet deep. Now, when you stand inside, only your helmet sticks above ground. The walls surround you like the inside of a small room. The wind almost disappears. Then Martinez begins gathering branches. Large pine limbs, thick enough to support weight. What are you doing? He smiles. Building us a house. One by one, he lays the branches across the opening, like roof beams. Then smaller branches. Then pine boughs. Then loose dirt. Finally, a layer of snow. From outside, the foxhole almost disappears completely. Only a small crawl entrance remains open. You crawl inside first. Immediately, everything changes. The wind vanishes. Completely. Outside, you can still hear it screaming through the trees. Inside, silence. The air feels still, heavy, almost peaceful. Martinez crawls in behind you. Neither of you speaks for nearly a minute. You're both waiting for the cold to return. It never does. Not the way it used to. The temperature inside remains steady. Cold. Yes, but steady. No icy gusts. No sudden waves of freezing air. Just quiet. You reach out. Touch the earthen wall again. Still cool. Still stable. It's like being inside the root cellar. You whisper. Martinez smiles. I don't know what a root cellar is. It's where farmers keep vegetables. He laughs. Well, he looks around your tiny underground shelter. Guess we're vegetables now. For the first time in nearly a week, the foxhole feels less like a grave and more like a shelter. You lie back onto the straw. The roof above you blocks the falling snow. The walls trap your body heat. The earth itself has become insulation. No military handbook taught you this. No officer demonstrated it during training. You learned it because the cold forced you to. Because every mistake had consequences. Some mistakes people never woke up from. That night, you sleep longer than you have since arriving in Belgium. Not because you're comfortable, because your body finally stops fighting the environment long enough to rest. Around midnight, you wake briefly. Martinez is asleep. Actually asleep. Not shivering. Not trembling. Sleeping. Outside, the wind continues howling. Somewhere nearby, artillery flashes briefly through the trees. The ground shakes. Snow falls from the branches above. But inside your tiny underground shelter, nothing changes. The walls absorb the sound. The roof holds. The temperature remains steady. You suddenly realize something. The Germans may know exactly where your unit is. They may have tanks, artillery, machine guns, thousands of experienced soldiers. But tonight, the cold doesn't own you anymore. And after everything you've endured, that almost feels like winning. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not complete silence. War never gives you that. There's still distant artillery. Still the occasional crack of a rifle somewhere beyond the trees. Still the endless wind sweeping across the Ardennes. But inside your foxhole, everything sounds different. Muted. The roof of branches, dirt, and snow absorbs the noise. For the first time in days, you wake without immediately shivering. Your body is still cold. That hasn't changed. But you're no longer fighting for every degree of warmth. Your little underground shelter is finally doing its job. Martinez stretches beside you. His joints crack loudly. You know, he says with a tired grin. I almost forgot what sleeping feels like. You smile. So did I. You crawl toward the entrance. Outside, the forest is already awake. Soldiers move between the trees carrying ammunition boxes. Medics hurry past with stretchers. Officers shout orders no one seems particularly interested in hearing. The battle hasn't paused simply because you managed to sleep. The war keeps moving, whether you're ready or not. You climb out of the foxhole. The cold immediately grabs your face. Even after improving your shelter, Belgium still reminds you who's really in charge. Nearby, a small crowd has gathered. No one is talking. You walk over. Martinez follows. As you get closer, your stomach tightens. Another soldier, lying perfectly still beside a shallow foxhole. His helmet rests beside him. Snow has already begun collecting across his uniform. He looks almost peaceful. Too peaceful. One of the medics quietly shakes his head. Didn't wake up. Nobody speaks. You look at the foxhole. Bare dirt. A thin layer of branches. No straw. No roof. Only about 2 feet deep. Exactly the way yours looked a few days ago. The realization hits you like a punch. That could have been you. The only difference was knowledge. A few simple lessons passed from one exhausted soldier to another. Nothing more. Martinez kneels beside the foxhole. So that's it. He whispers. The cold got him. A nearby sergeant answers. The Germans never fired a shot. His voice carries no anger anymore. Only exhaustion. They didn't have to. Someone quietly asks. What was his name? The sergeant checks a notebook. Private First Class Robert Henderson. He pauses. Kentucky. Kentucky. You've never been there. You imagine green hills, horse farms, warm summers, a mother waiting for a letter, a father expecting his son home after the war, maybe a younger brother who looked up to him. None of them know yet that Robert Henderson survived the Atlantic crossing, survived military training, survived German artillery, only to die inside a foxhole because nobody taught him how to sleep in winter. You stare at his face. His eyes are closed now. Someone must have done that after finding him. Snow gathers quietly across his boots. It looks wrong. War is supposed to be loud. Explosions, gunfire, smoke. Not this. Not silence. Not a young man who simply never woke up. Martinez finally breaks the silence. We teach them. You turn toward him. The new guys. He gestures around the forest. The replacements. The next convoy. They need to know everything. You nod slowly. He's right. No manual is coming. No miracle shipment of winter equipment. No officer is walking through the forest giving survival lectures. The soldiers have become each other's instructors. Experience has become the only textbook that matters. That afternoon, you and Martinez begin moving from foxhole to foxhole. Every new arrival hears the same speech. Dig deeper. Don't sleep on bare ground. Find straw. If there's no straw, pine branches. If there aren't pine branches, dead grass, leaves, anything dry. One replacement laughs. Seriously? You don't smile. I'm serious because I don't want you ending up like Henderson. The laughter disappears. Another soldier asks, how deep? 3 feet. Minimum. And cover the top. What about newspaper? You pat your jacket. Stuff every inch of empty space. It works. Soon, word begins spreading through the company. Not from officers, from soldiers. By evening, men all across the line are scavenging abandoned barns for straw. Others cut pine branches. Some even tear apart old newspapers to line their jackets. No one cares how ridiculous it looks anymore. Looking ridiculous is infinitely better than freezing to death. Late that afternoon, the older sergeant finds you again. He watches a group of replacements building insulated foxholes. A faint smile crosses his weathered face. You boys have done good. You shrug. We're just passing it on. Exactly. He nods. That's how armies survive. He kneels beside one of the foxholes, then scoops up 2 handfuls of soil. One is pale and crumbly, the other dark and sticky. You see this? Everyone gathers around. This light-colored soil. He crushes it easily between his fingers. Water runs through it. It stays dry. Dry means warm. He holds up the darker soil. This. He squeezes it. It sticks together like clay. Holds water. It turns your foxhole into a swamp. You spend enough nights lying in wet clay. He pauses. And you'll lose your feet before the Germans ever find you. Several soldiers glance down nervously. How do we tell the difference? A young replacement asks. The sergeant smiles. Use your hands. Clay feels smooth, sticky, heavy. This stuff. He lets the lighter soil crumble through his fingers. Falls apart. Always pay attention to the ground. The ground decides whether you sleep or freeze. You realize something. Back home, your father could read soil. Farmers always could. Rich soil, poor soil, wet ground, dry ground. Out here, those same skills determine who survives winter. Not because they're farmers. Because nature doesn't care whether you're wearing a uniform. The forest obeys its own rules. Ignore them, and it kills you. Learn them, and it might let you live one more day. As darkness settles over Belgium once again, you climb back inside your underground shelter. The roof keeps out the snow. The straw cushions your back. The newspaper inside your jacket crackles softly as you settle in. Martinez pulls the blanket over both of you. Neither of you says much. You don't need to. Outside, thousands of soldiers continue fighting the Germans. Inside your tiny foxhole, you're fighting something older than any army. Winter itself. And tonight, for the second night in a row, Winter is finally starting to lose. Christmas Eve arrives, without anyone realizing it at first. There are no calendars hanging in foxholes, no church bells, no decorations, no music drifting through snowy streets. Only another freezing morning that looks exactly like the one before it. It isn't until someone mutters, "Merry Christmas," that the date finally sinks in. You sit quietly inside the foxhole. Your hand instinctively slips into your jacket pocket. The letter, your sister's letter, still folded, still unopened. You stare at it for a long moment. For weeks, it had become a promise. If you could survive long enough to read it, then maybe you'd survive long enough to go home. Slowly, you unfold the paper. The handwriting is unmistakable, neat, careful. The handwriting of a little girl trying very hard to write like an adult. She tells you the cows are doing fine. She tells you your father finally fixed the old barn roof. She says your mother still cries whenever your name comes up at supper, though she pretends it's because of onions. Then she writes something that makes you stop breathing for a second. "Don't worry about us. Just come home. Christmas can wait." You read that sentence again. Then again. Your vision blurs. You quickly wipe your eyes before Martinez notices. He notices anyway. "Everything okay?" You nod. "Yeah." He doesn't ask to read the letter. He understands. Some things belong to home. And home feels impossibly far away now. Outside, the wind has finally calmed. Not because winter is ending. Because winter has already won. Everything that could freeze already has. The trees stand perfectly still beneath thick blankets of snow. The forest almost looks peaceful, until artillery reminds you where you are. The first shells arrive shortly after noon. A deep whistle cuts through the sky. Every soldier instinctively ducks. Then, boom, the explosion shakes the frozen ground. Another follows. Then another. German artillery begins walking shells across the forest. Tree bursts. The veterans warned you about these. An artillery shell doesn't have to hit the ground to kill. Sometimes, it's worse if it doesn't. The shell strikes high in the pine branches. Instead of burying itself in the earth, it explodes overhead. Thousands of razor-sharp steel fragments, mixed with shattered wood, rain downward like deadly hail. One exploding shell turns an entire tree into a cloud of splinters. Some pieces are as long as your arm, others no bigger than a pencil, every one of them moving faster than a rifle bullet. You flatten yourself against the wall of your foxhole. Another explosion, then another. The forest erupts. Branches crash to the ground. Snow showers through the air. The concussion pounds against your chest. Someone nearby screams. Another voice yells for a medic. Martinez grips his rifle tightly. Neither of you can do anything except wait. Minutes stretch into forever. Every shell sounds like it might be the one that lands directly on your roof, the one that ends everything. Then, as suddenly as it began, the barrage stops. Silence returns. Slowly, soldiers begin climbing from their foxholes. The forest looks different now. Entire trees have been snapped in half. Fresh craters scar the white snow. The smell of burned wood mixes with gunpowder. You and Martinez step carefully through the devastation. The first wounded man you find has dozens of tiny wooden splinters buried across his face. Not metal, wood. Another soldier has lost his helmet. A jagged pine branch punched straight through it. Had he been standing 6 inches taller, it would have gone through his skull instead. You finally understand why everyone chose foxholes beside trees, and why they feared them at the same time. The trees offered concealment, but during artillery attacks, they became weapons. Back near the aid station, a medic shakes his head while pulling splinters from another man's shoulder. Wood's worse than steel. You look confused. He notices. Steel's clean. He pulls another bloody splinter free. Wood breaks. Fragments. Infection. He tosses the bloody splinter into the snow. Nature always finds another way to kill. You quietly walk away. The words stay with you. Nature. Not Germany. Not Hitler. Nature. It almost feels unfair. Every lesson out here seems to carry the same message. The enemy isn't only the man shooting at you. It's the wind, the frozen ground, the snow, the trees, even your own sweat. Every part of the landscape seems determined to finish what the Germans started. That evening, as darkness settles once more over the Ardennes, a rumor spreads through the company. The Germans have surrounded Bastogne completely. No one knows if it's true. No radios reach your position. No newspapers. Only whispers moving from foxhole to foxhole. They've cut the roads. We're surrounded. We're trapped. Someone else quietly replies. So are they. A few exhausted soldiers laugh. Not because it's funny. Because sometimes, laughter is the only thing keeping fear from taking over completely. Martinez sits beside you. You think we'll get out of here? You don't answer immediately. Instead, you look around your tiny shelter. The straw, the newspaper tucked inside your jacket, the pine roof, the blanket. None of it came from official training. None of it came from supply depots. Every bit of it came from soldiers refusing to give up. Finally, you look back at him. I think. You pause. If the cold hasn't killed us yet, it's going to have to try a lot harder. Martinez smiles. Outside, snow begins falling again. Softly, almost peacefully, covering shell craters, covering broken branches, covering the dead. By morning, the forest will look untouched once again, as though nothing had happened. But beneath that fresh blanket of snow, the battle will still be waiting. And so will winter. Christmas Day, you wake because someone is singing. At first, you think you're dreaming. The voice is faint, almost carried away by the wind. Then you realize, it's real. Somewhere beyond the trees, an American soldier is quietly singing Silent Night. His voice isn't particularly good. It cracks on the higher notes. He forgets some of the words. But nobody laughs. Nobody tells him to stop. Instead, the forest simply listens. For 2 brief minutes, the war almost disappears. Then, a German artillery shell lands somewhere to the west. The explosion rolls through the trees. The singing ends. Reality returns. Martinez exhales slowly. So much for Christmas. You climb out of the foxhole. Snow crunches beneath your boots. The sky is the same dull gray it's been for weeks. You're beginning to think the sun abandoned Belgium entirely. Nearby, a field kitchen has finally reached your company. Not because conditions have improved, because someone managed to force supplies through the chaos. A line of soldiers stretches between the trees. Nobody complains about waiting. Hot food is worth standing in any line. By the time your turn arrives, a cook drops something steaming into your mess tin. It's barely recognizable. Thin stew. A few potatoes. Tiny pieces of meat. Mostly broth. You stare at it. Steam. Actual steam. You can't remember the last time you saw hot food. The smell alone almost makes your knees weak. Martinez blows gently across the surface. I think this is the best meal I've ever seen. You laugh. Don't even know what's in it. Don't care. The first spoonful burns your tongue. You welcome the pain. The warmth spreads through your chest almost immediately. It's incredible what a single hot meal can do to a man's spirit. For a few precious minutes, nobody thinks about artillery. Nobody thinks about Germany. Nobody thinks about freezing. Everyone simply eats. Fast. Afraid the warmth might disappear before they finish. The sergeant walks past carrying his own tin. He notices several men trying to save part of their meal for later. Eat it. One soldier looks up. I thought maybe I'd save some. The sergeant shakes his head. No. Your body's burning fuel every minute you're standing out here. Hot food now. Warm body. Now. Tomorrow's problems belong to tomorrow. The soldier nods. Finishes every last drop. The sergeant isn't being harsh. He's being practical. Everything you've learned out here points to the same truth. Calories equal survival. Without fuel, your body simply cannot make heat. Later that afternoon, another convoy finally arrives. Replacement soldiers. Again, they're easy to spot. Clean uniforms. Fresh faces. Eyes still full of confidence. You recognize yourself in them. The way you looked only a week earlier. One young private approaches. You been here long? You almost laugh. Long. It's barely been days. Yet it feels like years. Long enough. He shivers violently. They told us it'd be cold. You nod. They lied. He forces a nervous smile. I guess. You point toward his boots. How many socks? 3 pairs. Take one off. He looks confused. But, take one off. He hesitates. Finally obeys. As soon as the extra sock comes off, his boot fits properly again. You explain blood circulation, compression, heat. He listens carefully. By the time you're finished, he's asking questions instead of pretending to know everything. Good. Questions keep men alive. Pride doesn't. As evening approaches, you help another group build insulated foxholes. One soldier finds an abandoned haystack near a ruined farmhouse. Within an hour, half the company is hauling straw through the snow. Nobody cares who owns it. Nobody debates regulations. Survival has stripped away unnecessary rules. If something keeps men alive, it gets used. The older sergeant watches quietly, then says something you'll remember for the rest of your life. The army gave you equipment. He gestures toward the straw. You boys figured out survival. Those words settle heavily inside your mind. Because he's right. Every improvement you've made. Newspaper. Straw. Pine branches. Deeper foxholes. Covered roofs. None of it came from official doctrine. It came from observation. Experience. Failure. One soldier learning something, then refusing to let the next man make the same mistake. That night, the temperature drops even lower than before. Veterans later estimated some nights reached nearly minus 20 degrees Celsius in parts of the Ardennes during the offensive. The extreme cold contributed to thousands of cold weather injuries alongside the fighting. Inside your shelter, you hear the wind screaming overhead. It sounds almost alive, like some enormous creature searching the forest, looking for anyone careless enough to leave even a tiny opening. You pull the blanket tighter. Martinez shifts beside you. You ever think about after this? You don't answer immediately, because after feels like another lifetime. Finally, you nod. I think about sitting on my parents' porch. No snow. No artillery. No foxholes. Martinez smiles. I'm buying the biggest steak Texas has. You paying? Hell no. You both laugh. A real laugh. It echoes softly inside the cramped shelter. Outside, another artillery barrage begins. The laughter fades. Neither of you says another word. You simply wait together, listening to shells explode somewhere beyond the trees, hoping that when morning comes, you'll both still be here to hear them stop. The cold isn't trying to kill you quickly. That's the first thing you finally understand. A bullet ends everything in an instant. Artillery gives you a few terrifying seconds. But winter is patient. It steals tiny pieces of you every hour. First, the feeling in your fingers, then your toes, then your appetite, then your energy. Eventually, it begins taking your judgment. That's the dangerous part, because by the time a man realizes he's freezing to death, he often isn't thinking clearly enough to save himself. You witness it that afternoon. A replacement you've only spoken to once wanders past your foxhole. He's smiling. Actually smiling. His cheeks are bright red. His gloves are off. He's carrying his helmet under one arm. For a split second, it almost looks like he's enjoying himself. Martinez immediately stands. Hey, the soldier keeps walking. Where are your gloves? No answer. The smile never leaves his face. You climb out of the foxhole. Something feels wrong. Very wrong. The older sergeant notices him at the exact same moment. His expression changes instantly. Grab him. You and Martinez sprint through the snow. The soldier doesn't resist when you catch him. He simply looks confused. I'm hot. He begins unbuttoning his jacket. I don't need all this. Your stomach drops. The sergeant reaches you seconds later. No. His voice is sharp. He's not hot. He grabs the soldier's hands. He's hypothermic. The smiling private blinks slowly. I'm fine. No, son. The sergeant shakes his head. You're dying. Without hesitation, several soldiers drag the young man into a nearby shelter. They force his gloves back on, wrap blankets around him, hand him hot coffee. One medic begins rubbing warmth back into his hands. The private keeps insisting nothing is wrong. "I'm sweating. I feel great." The medic ignores him. The sergeant turns toward the rest of you. "Listen." His voice cuts through the forest. When a freezing man suddenly says he's warm, he pauses. That's when you start worrying. Everyone falls silent. Hypothermia doesn't always make people shiver. Eventually, it shuts the body down. The brain starts failing. They get sleepy. They get confused. Sometimes, he looks toward the recovering private. They even start taking their clothes off. Several replacements stare in disbelief. Why? The sergeant sighs. Because their brains stop working properly. They're convinced they're overheating. They're wrong. He lets those words settle. Never let your buddy sleep if he's acting strange. Never let him wander off. And if he tells you he's warm, he shakes his head. Don't believe him. You glance at Martinez. Neither of you says anything. You've spent days worrying about bullets. Now you're learning that even your own brain can betray you if the cold gets deep enough. That night, nobody sleeps alone, without anyone giving orders. Every foxhole begins pairing soldiers together. Buddy system. One sleeps, one watches. Then they switch, not only to watch for Germans, but to watch each other. If someone stops talking, wake him. If someone starts acting strangely, wake him. If someone refuses food, wake him. Because once hypothermia reaches the brain, a soldier often can't recognize the danger himself. The next morning, you discover another lesson. It starts with your boots. You pull them off to inspect your feet. The skin looks pale, wrinkled, almost waterlogged. You frown. They don't hurt. Martinez looks over. They should. The older sergeant happens to overhear. He immediately kneels beside you. That's not good. He examines your feet carefully. Still warm enough. He nods. But you're headed toward trench foot. You blink. I thought trench foot came from trenches. It comes from moisture. He points toward your socks. They're damp. You hadn't even noticed. The sweat from digging. The melting snow. Days of wearing the same boots. Everything adds up. He reaches into his own pack. Pulls out a dry pair of socks. Change them. I don't have another pair. He tosses his at you anyway. Now you do. You hesitate. What about you? He shrugs. I'll find another pair. Then he points around the forest. From now on, every chance you get, take your boots off. Dry your socks. Massage your feet. Keep blood moving. If your feet die, he looks directly into your eyes. You stop being a soldier. The simplicity of the statement hits hard. It doesn't matter how brave you are, or how good a shot. If you can't walk, the war ends for you. You spend nearly an hour drying your socks over your own body heat inside the foxhole. No fire, no stove, just patience. Nearby, other soldiers begin doing the same. Boots come off. Feet are rubbed. Dry socks become one of the most valuable items in the forest. Some men even tuck spare socks inside their jackets during the day, using body heat to keep them warm and dry until needed. One veteran laughs quietly. A dry sock's worth more than a medal out here. Nobody argues, because everyone knows he's right. That afternoon, supply trucks finally arrive. Hope spreads through the camp. Maybe winter clothing. Maybe better boots. Maybe gloves. Instead, the trucks unload ammunition, fuel, rations, medical supplies, necessary things, but not the things everyone secretly hoped for. A disappointed silence settles over the line. One replacement mutters, "Still no winter jackets." The sergeant hears him. "They're coming." Then, after a long pause, he quietly adds, "I just hope they get here before spring." No one laughs, because it isn't really a joke. By now, everyone understands the truth. The army will eventually solve the equipment problem. Better boots, better jackets, better training. History would prove that. But for the men freezing in Belgium during December of 1944, those improvements are still somewhere far away. locked inside warehouses, loaded onto ships, buried beneath paperwork, until they arrive. The only thing standing between life and death is the man sharing your foxhole, and whatever lessons he's willing to pass on before it's too late. By New Year's, you barely recognize yourself. Not because of wounds, not because of battle scars, because of the mirror, or rather, the lack of one. You haven't seen your own face in weeks, but you don't need to. Every soldier around you has changed the same way. Cheeks hollow, eyes sunken, beards growing wild beneath cracked, frost-bitten skin. Everyone looks older, much older. A month ago, most of you still looked like boys. Now, the forest has turned you into old men. Martinez notices it first. You've gotten skinny. You laugh. So have you. He shrugs. I always wanted to lose weight. You picked a hell of a diet. For a second, the two of you actually smile. Then your stomach growls loudly enough that both of you hear it. The joke dies immediately. Food has become another enemy. Not because there isn't any. Because there isn't enough. The K-rations arrive frozen solid. The canned meat often has to be chipped apart with a bayonet. The crackers snap like pieces of wood. Chocolate bars, if you're lucky enough to have one, become impossible to bite. Everything freezes. Everything. One morning, you watch a soldier trying to pour coffee. It comes out in slow brown slush. Another man leaves his spoon outside for only a few minutes. When he picks it up, the metal sticks to his bare fingers. He has to tear it away, taking skin with it. The cold punishes every mistake, even tiny ones. That afternoon, a supplies sergeant gathers several replacements around a pile of rations. You boys think eating 3 meals is normal? A few nod uncertainly. He shakes his head. Not out here. He opens several ration boxes. Eat whenever you can. A little, then a little more. Keep feeding the furnace. He taps one of the boxes. Your body's burning fuel every minute. If you wait until you're starving, you're already behind. You remember your father saying something similar during harvest season. Never wait until you're exhausted before eating. Keep feeding the machine. Back then, he meant farming. Now, the machine is you. The next lesson comes unexpectedly. A replacement named Collins wanders into your foxhole carrying 2 full canteens. You guys got water? Martinez laughs. Water. Collins proudly holds one up. Filled both this morning. He unscrews the cap, turns it upside down. Nothing comes out. He bangs it against the wall. Still nothing. Frozen solid. You almost feel bad for laughing. Almost. The older sergeant overhears. You keeping those outside your jacket? Collins nods. Yeah, that's your problem. He demonstrates using his own canteen, instead of hanging from his belt. It's tucked beneath his field jacket, pressed against his ribs. Body heat. He says simply, if your water freezes, you stop drinking. If you stop drinking, he looks around the group. You're in trouble long before you feel thirsty. Several replacements seem confused. It's freezing. How can you get dehydrated? The sergeant smiles. Easy. He points toward their breath. Every cloud you see, that's water leaving your body. Every breath. Every hour. You sweat inside those clothes. You lose water. You just don't notice because it isn't hot. The realization spreads slowly across the group. Even winter steals water. From that day forward, most soldiers begin carrying canteens beneath their jackets whenever possible. Not because it's comfortable, because liquid water is infinitely more useful than carrying a block of ice. That evening, you and Martinez walk through the nearby woods gathering more pine branches. Your roof has started sagging beneath repeated snowfalls. While working, you notice something strange. The veterans aren't wasting movement. At all. Nobody walks farther than necessary. Nobody carries more than needed. Nobody stands around talking in the open. Everything is deliberate. Every step saves energy. Every unnecessary movement burns calories. Martinez notices it too. They move different. You nod. They've learned. The veterans aren't lazy. They're efficient. The forest taught them. Every extra trip through deep snow costs precious energy. Every unnecessary shovel full creates more sweat. Every mistake demands more calories. And calories have become more valuable than bullets. Back at the foxhole, the two of you reinforce the roof. Fresh pine boughs. Fresh snow packed carefully across the top. Inside, the shelter feels almost familiar now. The straw has flattened slightly beneath weeks of use. The newspaper inside your jacket has become soft from constant wear. Every piece of equipment carries signs of adaptation. Nothing looks the way it did when you first arrived. Neither do you. Before sleeping, Martinez suddenly asks, "You think anybody back home knows what this place is really like?" You think about it. Newspapers back home print maps, arrow movements, names of towns, numbers of casualties. But they don't describe this. They don't describe newspaper stuffed inside jackets, or sleeping on straw stolen from Belgian barns, or praying your buddy notices if you stop making sense from hypothermia. No. You finally answer, "I don't think they could imagine it." Martinez nods. Probably better that way. The two of you settle beneath the blanket. Outside, the temperature begins falling once again. Another brutally cold night settles over the Ardennes. Another test. Another battle against an enemy that never sleeps. But now, you know something you didn't know when you first climbed off that truck. The Germans weren't the only force adapting to winter. So were you. One lesson, one night, one survivor at a time. By the second week, the cold has become predictable. Not weaker, just familiar. Like an enemy you've learned to respect. You know exactly what it will do if you give it the chance. You know how quickly wet socks become dangerous. You know the wind always finds the smallest opening in your clothing. You know that sleeping directly on frozen ground is as deadly as standing in front of a machine gun. Most importantly, you know winter never stops looking for mistakes. It waits, patiently, for someone to get careless. That lesson comes just before dawn. You're standing watch while Martinez sleeps. The forest is almost completely still. Snow muffles every sound. Even artillery seems distant tonight. Then, you hear footsteps. Not running. Walking. Slow. Heavy. You immediately shoulder your rifle. The figure appears between the trees. An American soldier. Alone. He isn't carrying a weapon. His helmet hangs loosely from one hand. His other hand swings lazily at his side. Something feels wrong. Very wrong. You call out, "Halt." No response. The man keeps walking. Halt. Still nothing. He doesn't even look at you. You climb out of the foxhole. Martinez wakes instantly. "What is it?" You point. The soldier keeps wandering through the trees as though he's taking an evening stroll back home. The older sergeant appears from another position. The moment he sees the man, he starts running. "Get him." All three of you reach the soldier together. Up close. His eyes aren't focused. They're staring through you. His face is pale beneath a layer of frost. His lips are almost blue. "What unit are you with?" the sergeant asks. The soldier blinks. Looks around slowly. "I." Long pause. "I don't remember." The sergeant grabs both of his shoulders. "What's your name?" "Nothing." The soldier simply stares. His brain is shutting down. Hypothermia. Not severe enough to kill him yet, but severe enough to erase pieces of who he is. The medic arrives moments later. He immediately wraps the man in blankets. No fire. He warns everyone nearby. Warm him slowly. The replacements look confused. You don't throw freezing hands into boiling water. The medic explains while rubbing warmth back into the soldier's arms. You damage the tissue. Slow. Steady. The body has to catch up. You watch quietly. The soldier eventually begins speaking again. His memory returns in pieces. His name. His company. His hometown. Almost as though someone is slowly turning the lights back on inside his head. It leaves you shaken. Not because you almost lost another man. Because you realize that could happen to anyone. Even you. That afternoon, the weather changes again. The snowfall stops. The clouds finally break apart. For the first time in weeks. The sun appears. Weak. Pale. Barely visible through the winter haze. Still, every soldier stops for a moment. Just two. Look at it. Nobody says anything. There isn't much to say. You'd forgotten what sunlight looked like. The warmth doesn't last. It isn't nearly strong enough to melt the snow. But something unexpected happens instead. The frozen ground softens slightly. Only the surface. Just enough. Suddenly, the roads become mud. Trucks begin sliding. Jeeps get stuck. Artillery pieces sink into the earth. Within hours, the battlefield transforms again. The snow that nearly froze everyone to death now turns into thick, freezing slush. Another problem. Another lesson. The veterans aren't surprised. One of them laughs quietly. Belgium doesn't let you get comfortable. He's right. Not for one day. Not for 1 hour. That evening, Martinez studies the muddy entrance to your foxhole. If that freezes tonight, you immediately understand. The entrance could seal shut. Without another word, both of you begin reinforcing it. Boards from a broken fence. More pine branches. Anything to keep the mud from collapsing. The older sergeant notices. Good. He nods. You boys are thinking ahead now. That's the biggest change. Weeks ago, you reacted to problems. Now, you expect them. You prepare before disaster arrives. Because winter always gives you another test. The only question is whether you've learned enough from the last one. That night, the temperature drops below freezing once again. Exactly as expected, the muddy roads harden into ice. Fresh snow covers everything. Your reinforced entrance holds perfectly. Nearby, several poorly built foxholes collapse under the frozen weight. The soldiers inside spend half the night digging themselves free. You help where you can, then crawl back into your shelter. Martinez looks around the cramped underground room. You know, he smiles. When we got here, I thought this place looked like a grave. You glance at the straw, the pine roof, the insulated walls, the tiny entrance. It still does. You answer. But now, you pull the blanket tighter around both of you. It's our grave. Martinez laughs, then shakes his head. That's probably the saddest thing anybody's ever said. Maybe, but it's true, because somewhere along the way, this miserable little hole stopped feeling temporary. It became home, not because you wanted it to, because surviving demanded it. Outside, the war continues. German patrols move through the frozen forest. American artillery answers. Snow falls silently over both armies alike. The winter doesn't care what uniform a man wears. It punishes everyone equally. But now, you're no longer just enduring it. You're learning how to beat it. One cold night at a time. By the middle of January, the cold isn't the thing that surprises you anymore. It's the men. When you first arrived in Belgium, everyone looked to the officers for answers. What road to take, where to dig, when to move. Now, the officers still gave orders. But when it came to surviving winter, everyone watched the veterans. The sergeants. The men who had somehow stayed alive long enough to learn the forest's rules. One afternoon, another truckload of replacements finally arrives. You recognize the look immediately. The same one you wore weeks ago. They climb down carrying spotless packs. Clean blankets. Brand new shovels. One private even complains about how cold the truck ride was. Several veterans exchange knowing smiles. One quietly mutters. He doesn't know yet. No, he doesn't. The young private walks over. You guys been here long? Martinez glances at you. You answer. You nod toward the replacement. Long enough. The young soldier smiles nervously. They told us we'd only be here a few days. Neither you nor Martinez says anything. Sometimes, silence tells the truth better than words. The private notices your foxhole. He crouches beside it. You built all this. You nod. It's too much work. He laughs. We'll probably move tomorrow anyway. You remember saying almost the exact same thing. Your first day? No point improving something temporary. The older sergeant overhears the conversation. He walks over slowly, then kneels beside the replacement. Son, he points toward your shelter. That's not a foxhole. The young soldier looks confused. No, no. The sergeant smiles. That's insurance. The private frowns. Against what? The sergeant looks toward the gray forest. The next sunrise. No one laughs, because everyone understands exactly what he means. That afternoon, you begin teaching again, not because anyone ordered you, because someone once did the same for you. The replacements gather around while you demonstrate how to line a jacket with newspaper. One soldier raises an eyebrow. Paper. It works. You hand him several crumpled sheets. Don't fold it flat. Leave it loose. Trap the air. Another asks about sleeping arrangements. You immediately point toward the foxhole. Never sleep alone if you can avoid it. He looks uncomfortable. We're packed pretty tight. Good. You answer. Stay that way. The replacement doesn't understand. So you explain. Body heat. One man's warmth becomes another man's survival. Two exhausted soldiers sharing one blanket stay warmer than two men sleeping separately. The principle is simple. Every bit of heat matters. Every degree counts. Martinez demonstrates how to build the straw foundation. Another veteran explains drainage. Someone else teaches them how to keep rifles functioning in freezing temperatures. Without realizing it, an outdoor classroom appears beneath the pine trees. No desks, no notebooks, only knowledge purchased with suffering. And every lesson carries the same hidden message. Learn this, or someone dies. Late that afternoon, the company receives unexpected visitors. Several engineers arrive from division headquarters. They begin inspecting defensive positions. One of them stops beside your foxhole. He stares for several seconds, then climbs inside. He examines the roof, the straw, the pine branches, the depth. Finally, he climbs back out. Who designed this? Nobody answers immediately. Then the older sergeant points toward you and Martinez. They did. The engineer nods slowly. This is smart. He looks around the company. How many others are built like this? Hands begin pointing in every direction. Nearly every veteran position has evolved. Each one slightly different. Each one improved through experience. The engineer smiles faintly. You boys figured out what the manuals didn't. The words linger long after he walks away. Because they're true. War has a strange way of rewarding adaptation. The army arrived with official doctrine. The forest rewrote it. That evening, another rumor spreads through camp. Winter clothing is finally on the way. New boots, better jackets, overshoes, proper insulated gear. Some soldiers cheer. Others barely react. Not because they don't want it, because they've already learned to survive without it. The equipment will help. Of course it will. But by now, the most valuable thing you've gained isn't a better jacket. It's experience. Experience weighs nothing. Needs no supply truck. Can't be lost in battle. And once you've learned it, no one can take it away. That night, the temperature falls once again. The wind howls above your shelter. Snow drifts silently across the roof. Inside, you pull your blanket around both of you. Martinez closes his eyes. You ever think, he says quietly, that we'll spend the rest of our lives telling people how cold this place was? You smile. They won't believe us. He chuckles. No, they won't. Outside, the Ardennes continues freezing everything it touches. Inside, two soldiers quietly drift to sleep. Not because the winter has become easier, but because they finally understand it. And sometimes, understanding your enemy is the first step toward surviving it. A week later, you notice something strange. The forest is getting quieter. Not peaceful. Never. Peaceful. Just different. The constant panic that filled the first days of the offensive has faded. The Germans are still attacking. American artillery still shakes the earth. Machine guns still chatter somewhere beyond the pines. Men are still dying. But the chaos has changed. The front line has settled into something more familiar. Something uglier. Routine. You wake. Check your feet. Eat whatever frozen ration you can force down. Repair the foxhole. Stand watch. Sleep. Repeat. War becomes routine. And somehow, that might be the most terrifying part. Because human beings can adapt to almost anything. Even living inside a hole in the frozen ground. One afternoon, Martinez notices you staring into the trees. What? You shake your head. I was just thinking. About. I don't remember what normal feels like. The words surprise even you. Back home, normal meant waking to the smell of coffee, complaining about chores, walking through muddy fields. Now, normal means checking whether your canteen froze overnight. Normal means sleeping beside another man because it's too dangerous not to. Normal means wondering whether the next artillery shell has your name on it. The forest has quietly rewritten your definition of ordinary. The older sergeant walks over carrying an armful of pine boughs. He drops them beside your foxhole. Roof's getting thin. You look up. He's right. The constant snow, wind, and freezing temperatures have slowly flattened the insulation. Everything out here requires maintenance, even survival. The three of you spend the next hour rebuilding the roof. Fresh branches, fresh snow packed over the top, a little more straw around the entrance. Every improvement makes the shelter slightly better, slightly warmer, slightly safer. When you're finished, the sergeant sits on an overturned ammunition crate for several minutes. Nobody speaks. Finally, he says something quietly. You know what the Germans got right? You and Martinez glance at each other. Neither of you answers. They respected winter. He stares into the trees. They planned for it. They trained for it. They expected it. He shrugs. We thought we'd beat them before winter mattered. Silence. Then he continues. When that didn't happen, he gestures toward the forest around you. Boys paid the price. There's no anger in his voice anymore. Only disappointment. Not in the soldiers. In the planning. In the assumption that nature could simply be ignored. It couldn't. Winter demanded preparation. And when preparation failed, improvisation became the only thing left. That evening, another replacement approaches your foxhole. This one is older. Maybe 30. Older than most of the company. He notices the newspaper stuffed inside your jacket. Does that really work? You pull back your coat. See for yourself. He reaches inside, feels the layers, then nods slowly. My grandfather used to do that. You smile. So did my grandmother. The man laughs quietly. Funny. What is? Half the army surviving because of grandmothers. You think about it. He's right. Not military engineers. Not official equipment. Not expensive technology. Simple lessons passed through families. Knowledge born during hard winters and harder times. Knowledge that suddenly became priceless on a Belgian battlefield. The next morning, a light snowfall begins again. Fresh powder quietly covers everything. You notice something remarkable. From a distance, your foxhole is almost impossible to see. The snow has blended perfectly with the roof. The entrance is hidden beneath pine branches. Only someone standing a few feet away would notice it. Nature itself has become camouflage. Martinez grins. Guess we're invisible. Let's hope the Germans agree. Hours later, a German reconnaissance patrol moves somewhere beyond your position. You hear voices, footsteps, branches snapping. Every man in your company freezes. Nobody moves. Nobody speaks. Even breathing seems too loud. The patrol passes, less than 100 yards away, then disappears. Only after several minutes does anyone dare exhale. The older sergeant smiles faintly. Good roof. Martinez lets out a shaky laugh. Best construction project I've ever built. You realize something. Weeks ago, you thought the foxhole existed to protect you from bullets. Now, it protects you from everything. The wind, the snow, the freezing ground, enemy observation, artillery, even exhaustion. It's become far more than a hole. It's become the difference between surviving and becoming another frozen name on tomorrow's casualty report. That night, before falling asleep, you pull your sister's letter from your pocket one more time. The paper has become soft around the edges, almost worn through. You've read it dozens of times. Yet one sentence still catches your attention. Just come home. Simple words. Nothing dramatic. Nothing poetic. Just come home. You fold the letter carefully. Place it back inside your jacket. Then close your eyes. Outside, the wind continues searching the forest. Inside, your little underground shelter holds firm. One more night, one more sunrise, one step closer to home. If home is still waiting, the snow keeps falling. Not heavily, just enough. A constant, quiet curtain drifting down from a sky the color of old steel. After a while, you stop noticing it. That's another thing nobody warns you about. The human mind adapts, even to misery, especially to misery. You remember your first day in Belgium. Every gust of wind felt unbearable. Every frozen breath shocked your lungs. Now, you instinctively pull your scarf a little higher. Stamp your boots twice. Flex your fingers. Check Martinez. Then continue with your day. Survival has become routine. And routine keeps people alive. Just before dawn, the company receives new orders. Not an attack. Not a withdrawal. Something simpler. Move positions. Only a few hundred yards. But in weather like this, a few hundred yards feels like crossing a continent. You and Martinez begin breaking down the foxhole. Not all of it. Just enough to carry what matters. The blanket. The extra socks. The precious newspaper lining your jackets. The shovel. The canteen tucked safely beneath your coat. Everything else. The straw. The carefully layered pine roof. The little underground room that kept you alive. Stays behind. You climb out one last time. For a moment, you simply stand there looking at it. Weeks ago, it had been nothing more than a hole in frozen dirt. Now, leaving it feels strangely emotional. Martinez notices. You gonna miss it? You smile. I think I might. He laughs. Imagine telling somebody back home you'll miss a foxhole. They'd think we lost our minds. Maybe we did. Neither of you argues. The march begins. Snow crunches beneath hundreds of boots. Every man carries everything he owns. No one talks much. Talking wastes energy. Breathing already takes enough effort in air this cold. Halfway through the march, you pass another abandoned American position. Dozens of empty foxholes. Some shallow, some deep, some expertly built, others little more than frozen pits. Pieces of equipment still lie scattered across the snow. Broken helmets, empty ration boxes, discarded gloves. Evidence that another unit fought here before yours. You stop beside one of the better-built shelters. It looks almost identical to yours. Deep, covered, insulated with straw. Someone learned the same lessons. Someone survived here. Martinez kneels beside it. They figured it out too. You nod. Everybody eventually does. He looks up. The ones who live, anyway. The words hit harder than expected. Because they're true. Every improvement in these woods has been written in experience. And experience usually comes at someone else's expense. The column keeps moving. Soon you reach the new defensive line. The forest looks almost identical. Same pine trees. Same frozen earth. Same endless snow. Only the ground beneath your boots has changed. The older sergeant points toward a small rise overlooking a narrow road. This is home now. No one complains. You already know what comes next. Shovels appear almost immediately. Nobody waits for orders anymore. Within minutes, the sound of digging echoes through the trees. Replacement soldiers begin making the same mistake. 2-foot foxholes, bare dirt, open tops. Before the sergeant can even say anything, you and Martinez walk over. You'll want to go deeper. The young private sighs. It's frozen solid. You hand him your shovel. So was ours. Another soldier asks, why deeper? Instead of answering, you climb into one of the completed foxholes nearby. Only your helmet remains visible above ground. Then you step back out. The deeper you are, you point toward the wind whipping across the hill. The less of that reaches you. You point toward the earth. And once you reach the darker soil, it gets easier. The replacements stare. Exactly the way you once stared at older veterans. Not completely convinced, but curious enough to listen. Within an hour, nearly every foxhole is deeper than regulations required. By sunset, several already have pine roofs. The lessons are spreading faster now. Not because the Army finally changed its manuals. Because the soldiers changed each other. Late that evening, The older sergeant walks over carrying 2 steaming cups. Coffee. Real coffee. He hands one to you. One to Martinez. You boys earned this. Neither of you knows what to say. He sits beside the unfinished foxhole. For several minutes, the 3 of you simply drink, watching snow drift across the forest. Finally, the sergeant breaks the silence. You know, he stares into the distance. When this war's over, no one's going to write books about newspapers stuffed inside jackets. They'll write about tanks, generals, big battles. He takes another sip. They'll never know. He looks toward the rows of freshly dug foxholes. That a handful of straw saved as many lives as some battles. You think about that. History remembers victories, maps, commanders, dates. But history rarely remembers the tiny decisions that kept ordinary soldiers alive long enough to fight those battles. A crumpled newspaper, a dry pair of socks, a deeper foxhole, a buddy who refuses to let you fall asleep when hypothermia starts stealing your mind. Those stories rarely make it into history books. Yet without them, many of the men who fought those famous battles would never have survived to fight them at all. You finish the last of your coffee. It has already begun cooling. The air steals heat from everything, even hope, if you let it. But now, you know better, because winter has taught you its rules. And as long as you keep following them, you still have a chance to see another sunrise. Another letter from home, another Christmas, a chance to survive. By the time January begins giving way to February, you realize something that would have seemed impossible only a few weeks earlier. You aren't surviving because you're tougher than everyone else. You're surviving because you've stopped fighting the winter and started working with it. That's a lesson nature teaches over and over again. The strongest tree in the forest isn't always the one that survives the storm. Sometimes, it's the one that bends. The forest has become your instructor. Every morning begins exactly the same. Before your boots even touch the frozen ground, you check your feet. Dry socks. No pale skin. No numb patches. No blisters. Then your canteen. Still liquid. Good. Then your newspaper lining. Still dry. Still trapping warm air. Then the roof. Brush away fresh snow. Replace crushed pine boughs. Patch any gaps before the wind finds them. Only after all that, do you think about the Germans. That would have sounded ridiculous when you first arrived. Now, it's simply routine. One morning, you notice something unusual. The replacements aren't asking questions anymore. They're giving answers. One young private catches another soldier about to wear 3 pairs of socks. No. He shakes his head. You'll lose circulation. Another reminds his buddy to keep his canteen beneath his jacket. Someone else gathers pine branches before sunset without being told. You smile quietly. The lessons have taken root. The knowledge now belongs to everyone, not just the veterans. That's how survival spreads. One soldier learns, then teaches another, who teaches another, until eventually, nobody remembers where the lesson began, only that it works. Later that afternoon, a fresh group of replacements arrives from England. They look exactly the way you once did. Wide-eyed, confident, cold. One young corporal notices the newspaper sticking from inside your jacket. He laughs. What's that supposed to do? Before you can answer, a replacement who arrived only a week earlier steps forward. It'll save your life. The corporal raises an eyebrow. Seriously? The replacement nods. Seriously. You don't say a word. You don't have to. The knowledge has started traveling without you. That's when you understand something. The older sergeant wasn't really teaching foxholes, or straw, or newspaper. He was teaching survival. And now, the students have become the teachers. That evening, the company receives long-awaited supplies. Several trucks slowly grind through the snowy roads. Soldiers gather immediately. Hope spreads faster than the trucks themselves. The tarps come off. Inside, new winter jackets, proper insulated overshoes, better gloves, wool liners, equipment that should have arrived weeks earlier. A strange silence settles across the men. Not because they're unhappy, because everyone is thinking the same thing. Where was this? When Henderson froze, where was it? When hundreds of men stuffed newspapers into their jackets, where was it? When entire units were digging desperately through frozen ground with bleeding hands. Martinez runs his fingers across the new jacket. It's nice. You nod. It is. Then you look back toward your foxhole. But he finishes the sentence for you. I'd still keep the newspaper. You both laugh. Because now you know. Good equipment matters. It always has. But equipment alone isn't enough. Without experience, even the best gear can be used poorly. The older sergeant walks over. He watches everyone trying on their new clothing, then quietly says, "Don't let the new gear make you careless." Several soldiers stop smiling. The cold hasn't changed. He taps one of the insulated jackets. This helps. It doesn't make you invincible. He points toward the forest. Winter's still out there, and it'll punish overconfidence faster than the Germans ever will. Nobody forgets those words. That night, you wear the new jacket. It's warmer, much warmer. The wind barely reaches your chest now. Your hands stay comfortable longer. Your feet don't ache quite as quickly. The improvements are real, obvious. But before crawling into your sleeping place, you still spread fresh straw beneath your blanket. You still inspect the roof. You still tuck newspaper inside the empty spaces. You still sleep beside Martinez. Because survival was never about one trick. It was about dozens of small habits, repeated every single day. One forgotten habit could still cost a life. Before falling asleep, Martinez quietly asks, "You think we'll ever forget this place?" You don't answer immediately. Instead, you listen. The wind, the distant artillery, the quiet crackle of straw beneath your blanket. Then you finally shake your head. No. Even if we wanted to, I don't think this forest would ever let us. Outside, snow continues falling across Belgium, covering foxholes, covering shell craters, covering footprints that disappear by morning. But some things, no amount of snow can ever bury. The lessons these soldiers learned would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The first thing you notice is the sound, not artillery, not machine guns, birds. For the first time in what feels like forever, you hear birds. Just a few. Somewhere high in the pine trees. It's such an ordinary sound that for several seconds you simply stand there listening. Martinez hears them too. You know, he says quietly, "I forgot birds existed." You smile. So did I. War has a strange way of shrinking the world. After weeks in the Ardennes, life becomes nothing more than the few hundred yards surrounding your foxhole. Everything beyond that almost stops existing. Home, cities, families, even seasons. They begin feeling like stories somebody once told you. Not memories. Stories. That afternoon, the company receives orders to strengthen defensive positions again. Not because another attack is expected immediately, because experienced officers have learned something. Winter isn't ending anytime soon. If you're going to live here, you might as well build something worth living in. You and Martinez begin improving your foxhole yet again. The entrance becomes narrower, smaller opening, less wind. You dig a shallow drainage trench leading downhill. When the snow melts during the day, the water now flows away instead of pooling beneath your blanket. Another veteran shows you a trick with pine logs. Place one across the entrance. Sit on it while removing your boots. Keeps your feet out of the snow. Tiny improvement. Huge difference. It's funny. Back home, nobody would ever notice something so small. Out here, little things become life and death. One dry sock. One extra handful of straw. 1 inch of drainage. One branch placed in exactly the right spot. Survival isn't dramatic. It's detailed. Late that afternoon, the weather changes again. The wind picks up. Dark clouds roll across the sky. Snow begins falling sideways. Within minutes, visibility drops to almost nothing. The entire forest disappears into white. One replacement stares into the storm. "I can't see 20 yards. The older sergeant nods. "Good." The soldier looks confused. "Good." The sergeant points into the swirling snow. Neither can they. For the first time, you realize winter doesn't only hurt you. It hurts the Germans too. Their patrols move slower. Their vehicles struggle. Their artillery observers lose sight of targets. Their supplies freeze just like yours. The cold has no loyalty. It fights both armies equally. The difference is preparation. That evening, another rumor spreads. The German offensive is losing momentum. Fuel shortages. Stiff American resistance. The brutal weather. Nobody knows exactly what's true. Rumors travel faster than facts in wartime. Still, something feels different. The desperate panic from December has faded. The line is holding. You don't celebrate. You've learned better. The forest punishes optimism just as quickly as carelessness. Instead, you repair your roof. Brush snow from the entrance. Check your socks. Drink water. Eat every crumb available. Survival first. Celebration later. Inside the foxhole, Martinez suddenly asks, "You remember that first day?" You nod. The truck? Yeah. The guys running the other direction. You remember them perfectly. The frozen faces. The abandoned rifles. The empty eyes. At the time, you thought they had simply lost their nerve. Now, you know better. Now you understand what exhaustion really looks like. What relentless cold does to the human mind. What happens when fear, sleep deprivation, hunger, and freezing temperatures all begin working together. Those men weren't cowards. They were broken. There's a difference. A very important difference. I judged them. You admit quietly. So did I. Martinez stares into the darkness. I won't do that again. Neither will you. Because the Ardennes has taught you something few people ever truly understand. Every person has a breaking point. Sometimes it's bullets. Sometimes it's hunger. Sometimes it's simply another freezing night with no end in sight. Outside, the storm continues building. Snow pounds against the roof. Wind howls through the trees. Your little shelter creaks under the pressure. Yet it holds, just like you. Not because you're stronger than the storm, because you finally learned how to survive inside it. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing a person can do. A few days later, the weather finally changes. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone to call it warm. But something is different. The wind isn't quite as vicious. The snow feels softer beneath your boots. During the afternoon, tiny drops of water begin falling from the pine branches overhead. At first, you think it's snow melting. Then you realize it is. The slightest rise in temperature has begun changing the battlefield again. And almost immediately, a brand new problem appears. Mud. By sunset, the roads that had been frozen solid for weeks begin turning into thick brown sludge. Every truck sinks deeper into the ruts. Jeeps struggle for traction. Even men on foot find themselves slipping every few steps. Winter isn't finished with you. It's simply changing tactics. The older sergeant watches a transport truck bury one rear wheel almost to the axle. He shakes his head. Frozen ground was easier. Martinez laughs. I never thought I'd hear anybody say that. The sergeant doesn't smile. You'll understand by tomorrow. He was right. By morning, the foxholes have changed. Not the walls. The floor. The frozen earth beneath your straw has begun releasing water. Little puddles appear where there were none before. The drainage trench you dug days earlier suddenly becomes the smartest thing you've built. Water slowly trickles away instead of collecting beneath your blanket. Nearby, other soldiers aren't so lucky. Several shallow foxholes now resemble muddy ponds. Blankets float in brown water. Men spend hours bailing them out using helmets. One replacement mutters, "I'd rather freeze." An older veteran walking past immediately replies, "No, you really wouldn't." Nobody argues. You've all learned something important. There are different kinds of misery, and none of them are worth wishing for. That afternoon, a combat engineer stops by your position. Unlike most visitors, he doesn't look at your weapons. He studies your shelter, the drainage, the roof, the straw, the depth. Finally, he nods. Good work. Martinez grins proudly. We've had practice. The engineer crouches beside the trench leading away from your foxhole. Most men forget this part. He traces the channel with one gloved finger. Water's just as dangerous as cold. He points toward another flooded position farther down the line. 1 wet night becomes trench foot. 2 wet nights becomes evacuation. He stands. 3. He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. Everyone understands. The engineer leaves after marking several positions on his map. You notice something interesting. A few hours later, other soldiers begin copying your drainage trench, then your roof, then your entrance. Your foxhole has quietly become the example others follow. Not because it's perfect, because it works. As evening approaches, another group of replacements joins the line. This time, something feels different. Before you even reach them, several soldiers are already stuffing newspaper into their jackets. Others are gathering pine branches. One man immediately starts digging deeper than regulations require. You stop beside him. Who taught you that? He doesn't even look up. Guys from the last company. You smile. The lessons are moving faster than the army ever could. Not through manuals. Through people. Through conversations around foxholes. Through exhausted veterans refusing to let another young soldier repeat their mistakes. That's how real knowledge survives. One story at a time. That night, the rain begins. Not snow. Rain. Cold. Freezing rain. It strikes the roof with a steady tapping sound. Every soldier immediately understands the danger. Rain soaks clothing. Soaked clothing steals body heat. Body heat disappears. Then men disappear. You and Martinez quickly inspect the roof. A few small leaks. Nothing major. You patch them with extra pine boughs and loose earth. Nearby, several uncovered foxholes begin flooding almost immediately. Men scramble through the darkness, trying to save blankets and equipment before everything becomes soaked. The older sergeant walks past carrying an armful of branches. He shakes his head. Winter's changing. He tosses the branches toward one flooded position. So do we. That's the secret. Not strength. Not luck. Adaptation. Every single time the weather changed, the soldiers who survived changed with it. Snow demanded straw. Frozen ground demanded depth. Wind demanded roofs. Rain demanded drainage. Nature kept rewriting the rules. And the soldiers who kept learning, kept living. Before climbing beneath the blanket, you glance outside one last time. Rain falls steadily across the dark forest. Somewhere beyond the trees, the Germans are listening to exactly the same rain, digging exactly the same trenches, trying just as desperately to stay alive. Because out here, the weather doesn't recognize uniforms. It simply chooses whoever ignores it first. By the end of January, the forest begins giving back small pieces of hope. Not enough to make anyone optimistic, just enough to remind you that winter, no matter how cruel, can't last forever. You notice it one morning while standing watch. A thin beam of sunlight slips through the pine branches. It lands across the snow in front of your foxhole. For weeks, the world had been nothing but gray. Gray skies, gray uniforms, gray smoke. Now, for just a few seconds, everything glows gold. Martinez climbs out beside you. What are you looking at? The sun. He squints. I forgot it existed. Neither of you laughs. Because it's true. Days blend together so completely out here that even ordinary things begin feeling extraordinary. Sunlight, running water, a bird, the smell of fresh earth beneath melting snow. Tiny reminders that another world still exists beyond this frozen battlefield. But winter isn't ready to leave quietly. That afternoon, the temperature drops again. Everything that melted during the day freezes solid overnight. Roads become sheets of ice. Boot prints harden into ankle-breaking ridges. The muddy entrances to foxholes become frozen ramps. Several soldiers slip before breakfast. One man twists his ankle badly enough that he has to be evacuated. Not because of enemy fire, because of ice. You quietly shake your head. Even now, nature keeps finding new ways to attack. The older sergeant notices your expression. You seeing it yet? What? The pattern. You think for a moment. Then answer. Every time we solve one problem, another one shows up. He smiles. Exactly. That's winter. It never quits. It just changes shape. Those words stay with you because they explain everything. The soldiers who survive aren't the strongest. They aren't the bravest. They're the quickest to adapt. Again, and again, and again. That evening, the engineers return. This time, they're carrying notebooks. One officer walks through the company inspecting foxholes. He sketches roofs, measures drainage trenches, writes down dimensions. Martinez nudges you. What are they doing? The older sergeant overhears. They're learning. You blink. From us. He nods. They finally figured out the manuals don't know everything. The realization feels strange. Weeks ago, you were learning from anyone willing to teach. Now, Army engineers are studying shelters built by exhausted riflemen. Because experience has rewritten the textbook. One engineer stops beside your foxhole. He carefully examines the roof. The snow layer. He murmurs while making notes. Adds insulation. He writes something else. Natural camouflage. Another note. Reduced wind exposure. You exchange a glance with Martinez. Neither of you imagined your desperate improvisations would someday become official recommendations. Yet here they are. Watching, learning, recording. The forest has become a classroom for everyone, even the experts. Later that night, you sit quietly beneath the blanket. The newspaper inside your jacket has become almost soft enough to forget it's there. Your straw mattress has compressed over time. The pine roof smells permanently of damp earth. Everything around you carries the scent of survival. Martinez suddenly asks, "You think anybody'll remember all this?" You look toward the low roof above your head. "I don't know. They'll remember the Battle of the Bulge. They'll remember Bastogne. They'll remember Patton." He nods slowly. "But not this." He taps the newspaper inside his jacket. "Not newspaper. Not straw. Not dry socks." You smile faintly. "Probably not." Outside, a gust of wind rattles the pine branches overhead. Snow slides quietly from the roof. The shelter doesn't move, doesn't leak, doesn't collapse. Weeks ago, you would have called it a hole. Now, it feels almost like a home. Not because it's comfortable, because you built it, because it protected you, because every improvement inside these cramped earthen walls represents another day you refuse to surrender. You pull your sister's letter from your pocket once more. The paper is beginning to wear thin from constant folding. You don't even need to read it anymore. You've memorized every word. Still, you unfold it anyway, just to remind yourself why you're still fighting, why you're still digging, why every lesson matters. Because somewhere, hundreds of miles away, someone still believes you're coming home. And after everything this winter has thrown at you, you're starting to believe it too. By early February, the fighting begins to shift. Not disappear, just move. The German offensive is running out of momentum. Fuel is scarce. Supplies are harder to move. American reinforcements continue pouring into the Ardennes. The desperate push that began in December has slowed into a brutal contest of endurance. And if there's one thing you've learned, it's that endurance is exactly what winter demands. One morning, orders finally arrive. Your company is being pulled off the line, not because the war is over, because another exhausted unit is replacing you. For several seconds, nobody reacts. The words don't feel real. You've spent so many weeks expecting another attack, another freezing night, another desperate scramble to survive, that the idea of leaving almost feels impossible. Martinez finally breaks the silence. "We're leaving." The lieutenant nods. "You've earned it." No cheering, no shouting, just quiet relief. The kind that settles deep inside your chest. The kind that's almost too heavy to express. You begin packing immediately. It doesn't take long. War teaches you not to own much. One blanket, one rifle, one helmet, a few extra socks, a canteen, the newspaper that's become part of your jacket. You hesitate before removing it, then smile. It stays exactly where it is. Some habits aren't worth breaking. Before leaving, you climb out of the foxhole one last time. The little underground shelter sits exactly as you built it. The pine roof now blends perfectly with the forest. Snow covers everything except the narrow entrance. Weeks ago, it looked like a desperate hole scratched into frozen ground. Now, it looks like proof. Proof that ordinary men can learn extraordinary things when survival leaves them no choice. Martinez stands beside you. You think somebody else will use it? You nod. I hope so. Because if another frightened 19-year-old climbs into this shelter tomorrow, maybe he'll survive his first night. Maybe someone else's lessons will save him. The same way older soldiers once saved you. The march away from the front feels strangely quiet. Nobody talks much. Not because they're sad. Because everyone keeps looking back. The forest disappears slowly behind the falling snow. Those pine trees have witnessed everything. Fear, exhaustion, friendship, death. Tiny victories no newspaper would ever print. Eventually, the Ardennes vanishes behind the hills. You don't know it yet, but you'll spend the rest of your life remembering that forest. Not because it was beautiful, because it changed you. Several miles behind the front, the company finally reaches a rear area camp. Real tents, hot food, medical inspections, fresh socks. For the first time in weeks, you remove your boots without worrying someone might attack while you're doing it. A medic carefully examines your feet. He nods approvingly. You've taken good care of them. You glance toward Martinez. We had good teachers. The medic smiles. So did I. Rows of soldiers sit around steaming pots of soup. Some eat silently. Others simply hold the warm bowls between frozen hands, enjoying the heat more than the food itself. You realize something. Nobody here is talking about killing Germans. Nobody is describing heroic charges. Instead, they're discussing foxholes, straw, dry socks, newspaper, how to keep water from freezing, how to recognize hypothermia before it's too late. These are the stories soldiers actually tell each other. Because these are the stories that matter. History usually remembers battles. Soldiers remember survival. That night, you sleep inside a canvas tent. There's a real cot beneath you, a wool blanket, even a small stove glowing softly in one corner. Yet, you wake twice. Not because you're cold, because you're waiting for the wind, waiting for artillery, waiting for snow to collapse your roof. They never come. It takes several minutes before your mind accepts it. You're safe, at least for tonight. Martinez laughs quietly from the cot beside yours. You awake too? You nod. I keep thinking I forgot to check the roof. He smiles. I checked mine. Both of you laugh. Not because it's funny. Because survival has become habit. And habits don't disappear overnight. Outside the tent, snow continues falling across Belgium. Somewhere far away, other young soldiers are climbing into foxholes for the very first time. Some of them are frightened. Some think the army has prepared them. Most haven't realized yet that the greatest lessons they'll learn won't come from training manuals. They'll come from the soldier beside them, the one willing to share a blanket, a pair of dry socks, or a crumpled piece of newspaper that might mean the difference between seeing another sunrise or becoming part of the frozen silence of the Ardennes forest. Weeks later, when people ask what the Battle of the Bulge was like, you discover something strange. You never know where to begin. Do you tell them about the tanks, the artillery, the German breakthrough, the endless columns of exhausted men marching through the snow? Or do you tell them about a crumpled newspaper, stuffed inside a jacket by a frightened 19-year-old who simply didn't want to freeze to death? Because somehow, that feels just as important, maybe more. The official reports would eventually focus on strategy, maps covered with arrows, supply lines, command decisions, how quickly units moved, how many miles were gained or lost. But those reports rarely captured what winter actually felt like. They couldn't. A report can tell you the temperature reached well below freezing. It can list the number of frostbite cases. It can record how many soldiers became cold weather casualties. But numbers don't tell you what it feels like. To wake up unable to move your fingers. To wonder whether your feet are still attached to your body. To hear another man crying quietly in the darkness because he's forgotten what warmth feels like. Numbers never tell that story. Months later, military investigators begin collecting reports from across Europe. They interview officers, doctors, quartermasters, ordinary riflemen. The conclusion surprises no one who survived the Ardennes. Many of the cold weather injuries didn't have to happen. The clothing wasn't adequate. Winter equipment arrived too late. Training focused on fighting the enemy, not surviving the environment. Those findings would eventually change everything. Future American soldiers would receive better insulated clothing, improved boots, layered winter uniforms. Cold weather survival training became standard. The lessons paid for in frozen Belgian forests would protect generations that followed. But for the young men who lived through that winter, those improvements came too late. They had already written the textbook. With frozen fingers, bleeding feet, and sleepless nights. Years pass. The war ends. The uniforms are packed away. Rifles disappear into museums. Battlefields slowly return to farmland. The shell holes fill with grass. Trees grow where artillery once exploded. Visitors walk through the Ardennes today without realizing how many lives were once balanced on tiny decisions beneath their feet. A deeper foxhole, a dry pair of socks, a roof made from pine branches. Simple things, almost invisible now, yet they changed history in ways few people ever notice. Imagine meeting Jimmy Callahan decades later. His hair has turned gray. His hands are rough from a lifetime of work back on the family farm. Someone asks him about the war. They expect dramatic stories, explosions, heroics, close calls with German soldiers. Instead, he smiles quietly, then says something unexpected. The smartest thing I ever learned over there. He pauses. Came from my grandmother. People look confused. He explains newspaper, trapped air, foxholes, straw. The listener laughs politely, thinking it's just an old man's story. Jimmy doesn't laugh, because he remembers exactly how close death stood that winter. He remembers Martinez, the older sergeant, Henderson, the frightened replacements, the men who never came home because nobody had taught them what cold could really do. He remembers that the greatest enemy he ever fought didn't wear a uniform. It didn't carry a rifle. It didn't speak German. It simply waited, patiently, silently, for someone to stop paying attention. History remembers the Battle of the Bulge as one of the largest and most important battles fought by the United States during World War II. And it was, but buried beneath the movements of armies, beyond the speeches, beyond the famous generals, was another battle, a quieter one fought inside thousands of frozen foxholes scattered across the Ardennes forest. A battle between ordinary young men, and one of the harshest winters Europe had seen in half a century. Some won that battle because they adapted, because they shared knowledge, because another soldier cared enough to say, dig deeper, change your socks, sleep beside someone, stuff newspaper inside your jacket. Tiny pieces of advice, worth almost nothing, until the moment they became worth everything. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside this story. Survival is rarely one heroic decision. More often, it's hundreds of small ones, repeated every single day, long after fear has become routine, long after hope has grown quiet, long after nobody is watching. Because sometimes, history isn't written by the strongest. It's written by the people who simply refuse to stop adapting. And thanks to those soldiers, the lessons learned in the frozen forests of Belgium would go on to save countless lives long after the guns of World War II finally fell silent.